Welcome to Cardboard Box Games. I'm Adam.
I'm Andrew.
And I'm Adam. Today, we're going to be talking about how to prioritize must-answer creatures in your gameplay. Let's get started. Alright, in KeyForge, you know that the main thing to do in KeyForge is to gain enough amber to forge your 3 keys to unlock the treasure. We are not worrying about killing your opponent. We're worried about getting to that treasure before anyone else. Maybe one day we'll actually learn what's in that vault. So, Age of Ascension has really changed the dynamic of the game for me. I don't know if you guys feel the same way. I feel like there's a lot more creatures that just change the dynamic of the game.
Yeah.
So think about the key imps. Dusk Witch is insanely powerful.
And the Mars guys that when you reap, you stun your guy. Pip also.
The Reaping Hate, Sir Meros, who captures all your thing. There's just an enormous amount of creatures that I feel like you have to deal with. And what I wanted to talk about today in this episode is how you prioritize that in your overall game plan. So let's start by thinking about the couple things that we want to let's just put this the right way. The 3 things to consider when you are about to play a must-answer creature. And I think the first one, Adam, is
when you play your creature and how much value you get from that. So if you have a succubus in your hand, you can just play it and expect them to go after it.
Yeah, Succubus is an example of a card that I think is sort of like a minor annoyance more than anything, right? I don't know. How do you guys play against Succubus? When you have a Succubus in your hand, how high do you prioritize getting that on the board?
I don't think I prioritize that at all.
Okay.
At all?
How about you, Andrew?
It depends on my hand. If I have lots of discards, then I'll just play it out. But I would somewhat want to play Succubus just to annoy my opponent to try to kill it, so it slows my opponent down.
And then I think going back to the idea of value that you were talking about. So you take a card like Succubus, it's probably going to live 1 or 2 turns, right? So maybe the value you got out of it is you technically gave your opponent 2 chains and you force them to attack a creature. Where you look at a card like Dusk Witch, who I feel like is the number 1 must-answer creature.
I have to agree, yeah.
Maybe followed closely by Professor Sutterkin, kind of. Because they can just run away with the game pretty quickly. There's also some other cards that I think. But you look at those and their value just explodes. You give them 1 turn in play, and your opponent can start running away with the game. You guys kind of agree with that?
I have to agree, yeah.
So the second thing that I'd say you need to look at, and this is one that we were just sort of talking about, is the overall board state. So we've decided how much value this card can provide if it stays in play. And now we're going to look at the board state, and for a good example of that is, can you protect this creature? Will this creature stay alive long enough to get value out of it? So a good example of that is your one deck that you play, Andrew, where you just always have a ridiculous amount of creatures. And I play a card that's a must-answer creature. How scared are you of that or that?
I mean, I'll try to kill it right away. If it's really bad to me, it's draw less cards, I can't have that at all.
Yeah. So if I play a Dusk Witch on you, how high are you prioritizing killing that?
I mean, I think Dusk Witch is a good card. It depends on the opponent's deck. If they have lots of creatures, I think you have to kill it. If they play lots of creatures on their turn, then I probably maybe not kill it. Maybe the next turn 2 to 3 creatures they might play. I think it's good, but it depends on the state.
So I have to strongly disagree with you. Dusk Witch is an incredible card all around, even if they play a few creatures, because they come in ready. You can fight with those creatures. You can reap with those creatures. You can do so many things with those creatures if they have actions and abilities.
And if you can set up a game plan where you have a Brobnar turn after a Dusk Witch with Calphine and Bingo Bang Bang, Lala of the Titanic, and I've had Into the Fray come in with those, and Grok, and it is just so much fun. That card is just ridiculously powerful. So I think that is the thing, though, that is you're not going to play Dusk Witch in a situation unless you just need to dump your hand. There are times you need to just dump your hand, and that is absolutely fine. But if you're looking for a a strong turn to come back and you want to set up and you feel like you can set up a place to maybe protect Duskwitch, and there's always direct damage. Absolutely always direct damage, and you can always consider that. But if there's a way that you can like look at the board state and say like based on the board, they cannot kill my Duskwitch. I'm gonna play it now so that next turn, if it survives, my turn is going to be ridiculous. And I think that's a pretty interesting dynamic there. The third thing that we wanted to ask the question about is like, how much does it change the overall strategy? You know, if you're going in and you're looking at your hand and you look at your board, you know, you just drew your Duskwitch. Does that change what you were going to do before you drew that Duskwitch?
It does for me completely. Because if I only had Duskwitch in my hand, and I have the rest of my hand full of creatures, I might just play Duskwitch, hoping that it'll survive for next turn for my next huge plan.
Especially if you can put it by a creature like Shadow Self.
Of course.
Like Shadow Self is like the best creature to put it by.
It can block damage, and it's basically a taunt guy.
Yeah, it is, and I mean, he has elusive, so the Duskwitch itself has elusive, and we've talked a lot about it. But anytime that you can protect, even like Professor Sutterkin or Pip Pip or any of those cards that just can annoy your opponents, like it's super valuable. So the new topic that the new idea we want to introduce, and a lot of people probably already think about this, is when you're building your gameplay out and you're thinking about how you're playing cards, you really want to look at best case scenario and worst case scenario. So we're going to call those the floor is the worst case scenario. We're going to call the best case scenario the ceiling. And they're mathematical terms that if you were to go and look up, like ceiling will round things up, floor will round things down. And it kind of applies really good here to these types of cards. So looking at your strategy overall, you're thinking, all right, I'm going to play Duskwitch. Worst case scenario, it's just going to die. How much does that mess me up next turn? Like, was I solely depending on Duskwitch staying alive to have a chance in this game? And the odds of that happening are fairly high in this game.
Very high.
So in that situation, you need to like weigh in. Okay, if worst case scenario happens, where does that leave me? And then you need to, on the reverse side of that, look at like if best case scenario, what does that do for me? And the things that I look at is there are times that I'm behind in the game, and what I have to do is I have to shoot for the ceiling. I can't win the game with just normal floor level like worst case scenario play. I have to take a chance at the best case scenario happening. So does that make sense, sort of, from the way we're thinking about that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it does.
So why don't we talk a little bit more about the value? And Andrew, you talked a lot about Succubus and wanting to get it out on the board. So Succubus is a card that you said you kind of prioritized, depending.
Yeah.
Why do you, like, what kind of value are you hoping to get out of Succubus?
At least 2 to 3 turns.
So 2 to 3 cards. So it's like a Binding Irons to you.
Yeah, something like that. But instead of binding irons, you can actually just kill it and stop the less cards. So.
And what about you, Adam? Like, what kind of value you're hoping when you put down a Succubus?
I mean, I'm hoping for at least they lose one card, but usually whenever I play Succubus, they always kill it right away.
Yeah.
So you end up hitting the floor.
Yeah.
I would say Andrew seems to like aim for like the middle road. For me, what I'm looking at is like, yeah, it's great when I make my opponent draw less cards. I love having that out. But what I'm looking for a lot of times is like with Succubus, I'm thinking about the value of it being on the board after many, many turns and making my opponent like have to answer it. So my favorite thing to do is to pair it with something like Binding Irons. You drop them down to now 4 cards a turn for a couple turns. And then I figure out ways to like get extra value from that card. But I don't think Succubus is even in the top 10 for must answer creatures anymore.
Yeah.
I feel like it was in Call of the Archons though.
I have to agree with you there, yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're thinking about value, like Duskwitch, the value you get from it is incredible depending on what you have in your hand. So if you have crazy creatures that can do some awesome stuff if they come into play ready, go for it. Like that is an awesome turn, especially there's no reason not to play it on turn 1. I just can't think of a reason why you would not play Duskwitch turn 1. And it is the number 1 must-answer creature in my mind. Cards like Succubus and Pip Pip and any card that makes your enemy's creatures get stunned, those don't matter to play on turn 1. There's no creatures for them to reap with.
Of course, yeah.
So, what other creatures can you guys think of? Can you think of any that on turn 1 you want to see out?
Professor Sutterskin.
And then like a good hand of logos to back it up?
Of course, yes.
Yeah. How about you? Is there any cards you look for on turn 1?
Well, Duck Switch.
Duskwitch for sure. I like Mother.
Mother is a good one.
Yeah, Mother is a great
It's not like a crazy value card, but I love like playing Mother on first turn. So those are the value cards I look for. And I'm also thinking like, are there any cards that you feel like you shouldn't play on turn 1? Is there anything that like that you should hang on to? I'm trying to think of an example of this. For me, like the
like Urchin and Ronnie and stuff like that.
yeah, that's kind of where I was going to. Is like those cards are ones that I just would rather not play on turn 1. And I mean, actually, I would say you should mulligan if that's your best play on turn 1. You should go for something better. So we've talked about value. Now we talked about board state. So let's go talk about board state. So with board state, how much are you valuing protecting a Duskwitch? Like, let's say the board state is completely even. They have even creatures. You have even creatures. They have, so they have plenty of stuff to kill your stuff. Whatever needs to happen. You've got a board of like 8 creatures. What do you do with the Duskwitch in your hand at that point? Do you guys play it?
I think I would still just play it for make them try to kill my guy and save some of my other guys on the board. I mean, it also depends what other untamed creatures I have on the board, what I have in my hand. But if I have like a good board of untamed, I probably would just call untamed just to reap with a bunch of guys.
And then play Duskwitch to try to put him in pressure?
Yeah.
I would try to clear his board because he might have creatures that might slow you down. Maybe he has those guys that when you reap, stun it. So I would just try to clear his board and then play Duck Switch. So then he has little creatures and you have lots of creatures, so your Duck Switch is less likely to die.
That's an interesting approach too, and I think both of those approaches, depending on the board state, can be the right decision. Because you have to look at like if your creatures are little and you can't clear, or if you've got bigger creatures and you can maneuver the board state to be in your favor. The thing that I always think about is like, say my opponent just went Brobnar, and I kill a few of their other house, so I leave them with just Brobnar creatures on the board, and maybe try to take out 1 or 2 of them as well. So what I want to do is I want to play Duskwitch, but leave them in a position where they have to call Brobnar again to be able to kill it. And it's an interesting dynamic, but that's the way my mind actually works is, okay, they just played 4 Brobnar cards. That was an amazing turn for them. I want to force them to go Brobnar again. How can I do that? And that's what I start doing with board state when I start thinking about if I can play Untamed, wipe out a lot of their other creatures. I mean, you think about it, they need 2 of a house. So really I just need to get them down to 1 of a house to be able to kill Duskwitch. It's different for other cards. For example, like if I have Pip, he dies so quick. Professor Sutterkin dies really quick. So you really need to have them protected. So really they can't have any creatures in those cases, or you got to have it by a taunt, and those are harder. But Duskwitch I think is a good example here. But I want to try to force them to go Brobnar, and even with something like Professor Sutterkin, I want to force them to go Brobnar as well, because optimally for me is I want to make them deal with my creature. Maybe they don't. Maybe they make the decision to not, and that's good too because I get the value from it. But for them to have to deal with it, they have to pick a house that they have creatures on the board for, and hopefully no creatures in their hand. Does that seem like an interesting strategy?
It seems like a perfect strategy from my point.
Have you guys done stuff like that before?
I mean, I feel like I've done it without really thinking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? Because I would just normally just play my cards down, and if they have creatures, I would usually sometimes just kill them if they're annoying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't actually go that far into thinking about forcing them to play Bromnar again to kill my own Duskwitch.
Yeah. How about you, Andrew? Does that seem like an interesting strategy?
I think that's a pretty interesting strategy indeed. I think it's smart to try to figure out what house they're gonna have to choose next to try to deal with the board and all that.
And I think that's all part of like the gameplay that we're talking about now is if you can play a Mustang as a creature and force your opponent to do something suboptimally, Like it puts you in a position that creature died. Yeah, that's fine.
But then you get the advantage.
Yes. One of my favorite Sanctum cards is Barristan Joya. He's the guy that doesn't let your enemy reap. So mid game, putting him in the board protected, like, is just so painful for your opponent, especially if they are a small creature deck. And I've had these small creature decks like Untamed, Logos, and Shadows, and not been able to do enough damage to kill that thing, and it drives me nuts playing against a card like that. So like thinking about the creatures they have on the board too is also super important. Yeah, and I ended up losing a tournament because of that card, because I literally, the most damage I could do was 2, and I just never could get like 3 of a house to sacrifice into that guy to get rid of him. It was brutal. So the third thing is like your overall strategy. The one thing that I've seen a lot of people do is, they move down you've got to look at like what you normally would do, which in my mind is maximizing cards played with cards that get you value on the board and getting you close to 6 amber. So that is my ultimate game plan. My game plan is like, can I put myself in an advantageous board state? Can I play cards from my hand? And can I get the 6 amber? And there's a balance between all 3 of those things. And the reason that I try to do all 3 of those is there are sometimes I can't play any cards in my hand, and that's okay. And there are cards that I sometimes can't, like use my creatures on my board, and that's okay. So, but ultimately, is sometimes like I can't get the 6 amber, and that's okay. So you just have to balance. Board state's more important now. Playing cards is more important because I need this card in my deck. And sometimes you have a creature like Duskwitch that might change that strategy a little bit. And I think this is important to talk about because good, crazy cards can actually throw you off your game plan. And I don't always think it's a good thing to do that. I think you have to just balance that in as an element of it. How do you guys prioritize your gameplay? Are you thinking same sort of things that I'm thinking? Or are you...
I have to totally agree with you. I think mostly I try to get to 6 amber every turn and play my creatures down, protect my creatures, and if they have any enemy creatures that are messing with me, I try to kill them.
Yeah.
I usually, most of the time, play the most cards in my hand. It depends what my board is, though.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time, I would just try to play all the cards I can and try to make as much value as possible.
Yeah, so you try to play cards, and then like there are times, and I think that's a good strategy overall. I think, especially when you're trying to get to certain cards in your deck. So say you have a Brig combo deck, which we've actually ran into, which is that Binate Rupture Interdimensional Graft. You know that you need that, so you need to dump your hand as quick as possible to get that combo going, so you can steal a bunch of your opponent's leftover amber, which is just incredible. By the way, I love that combo.
It is, yeah.
Painful to play against. And I think it's just an interesting dynamic that I think it's very easy to overvalue must-answer creatures, but then thinking about all 3 things, like how much value can I expect? What's the ceiling and floor of this? What's the current board state? And what will that leave me like next turn if things go bad? Where does that leave me if things go good? And how much does that throw me off my overall game plan? And then with that is like, my game plan is always to try to get the 6 amber. That's personally my strategy, is like, how can I leave the board in an advantageous state, and how can I get the 6 amber and make sure my next turn is good? And if that changes any of those dynamics for me, it's something that I got to really think about. But I do think there are times, especially when you are behind, that it is important to value like playing must-answer creatures. And I think that is something that we'll have to like really experiment more with, but I've actually been thinking about this a lot. Playing a must-answer creature can actually make your opponent do things that puts them a little bit behind, which can give you a slight advantage.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you guys agree with that?
I do agree with that.
I also agree.
It's good to slow down your opponent and make them choose houses that don't really work for them.
So Andrew, I think the next thing, let's talk about, just for fun, creatures that you would value highly in a hand, okay? So let's go round by round. So we've already talked about Dusk Witch. So no Dusk Witch. If you don't have one, you can pass and we'll hand it to someone else. I'm going to say I feel like Sir Marrows is a creature that you feel like, especially turn 3 or later, is a creature that you need to answer. Sir Marrows is a card that captures all amber from your opponent reaping. Do you have one that you feel like is a card that you could potentially value higher when playing?
I think the Grey Rider for me, because usually for my Sanctum decks, I usually hold on to Sanctum cards, try to get way for them to play and ready and fight right away. And I love Grey Rider for that because you can just play them anywhere on the board.
Especially when you get two of them side by side, they go boom, 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 boom.
I think
back
Mother is a pretty good card to have.
Mother's one. Mother's one that I just love getting on board because she's kind of like, I don't know, she's kind of innocent because like it gives you an extra card but doesn't affect your opponent. Mm-hmm. So I found that sometimes opponents don't care about Mother that much.
And it just helps you.
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting one. Let's see. We talked about Professor Sutterkin, and that card is just insane because if you can let them draw 3 or 4 extra cards on that, it's just mind-blowingly good.
Another card is another Logos card is Librarian.
Titan Librarian.
Titan, yeah.
That card can get you some value too if you can get it in, and that's another one that's kind of innocent because it doesn't mess with your opponent, but just sits there and like builds you up value.
Technically, it can mess with your opponent.
Yeah, it will eventually.
Yeah.
You can archive like your miasma or whatever.
It definitely will eventually. The thing about Titan Librarian that's a little bit a bummer is that you archive at the end of your turn. But I've had 2 in play before, and I've built up a massive archive, and I love it so much. I had like all my Sanctum cards like archived.
And in case you don't know exactly what it does, so at the end of your turn, if he's not on a flank, you draw your hand back up to 6, and then you archive.
Yeah.
People get confused by that whenever they play that. They don't know how it works exactly.
Because the end of your turn is the end of your turn, so it's after everything else has happened.
Of course.
Okay, so let's think of a couple other ones here. The one that I'm thinking about is the Collector Worm.
Ooh, yeah.
How must deal with do you think Collector Worm? Like playing Collector Worm on turn 1 to me is so much fun, especially if you have a Mars hand to back it up with, because they're not going to keep creatures for quite a while. What do you guys think of Collector Worm?
It's an amazing card.
Whenever I see Collector Worm on the other side, I'm like, I have to kill that creature. I can't let that live.
You can't let it live at all. It's perfect board control with that guy.
And it's hard to kill.
Exactly.
That 5 armor is ridiculously hard to kill. That's insanely hard to kill. Do you guys have any more must-answer creatures that you would prioritize playing?
I mean, the key imps at times.
Yeah.
I love playing them at times.
I mean, sometimes it's kind of hard though to decide when to kill them because if you
both haven't forged that key.
If you both are about to forge, whoever kills the key imp, the other person gets to forge ahead of time.
Yeah.
Possibly stop the other opponent.
Yeah, that's actually something I don't like. But what I do like is I forge my second key. You're on check. I play my silver key imp, and you can't forge, so you have to deal with that creature. That's the optimal gameplay. It rarely happens because you always get it at the wrong time, or you're behind. If you're behind, it's worse because you don't want to make yourself not be able to forge.
Yeah.
So there's the Tesmal was the other one I was thinking about, which is the disc guy that you reap with, and you choose the house your opponent cannot play next turn.
Yeah.
And like that card's pretty good too.
It is, yeah.
So I kind of prioritize getting that card down because you can get 1 or 2 reaps out of that guy. Super good, super good. Any other cards that you would prioritize pretty highly?
That Mars guy for each of his neighbors +2.
Yes, Nizix, the Nizix guy. Resonator. Nizix Resonator.
Yeah.
Make your opponent's keys cost +4, so takes 10 amber for them to get the key, which is really powerful.
It's really good. What about Drummerknot? Does Drummerknot?
I don't highly value him unless you have a bunch of good cards in your hand that goes with it.
Unless they have Ganger Chieftain, Juggernaut, or like that one card deal 2 damage to the flanks and just keep.
Yeah, I'm sort of there with you because with Drummerknot. It's hard because you have to have other cards with it to make it good. Otherwise, it's just a dumb giant. But at the same time, like let's say your opening hand, if you have a Drummerknot and a Gengar Chieftain, you play Drummerknot turn 1. That's pretty darn good.
It is.
Yeah.
Turn 8, there's a board that becomes less valuable. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to get that 6 amber.
I mean, you can get a bunch of kills off of it, maybe.
Yeah, if you can work out some combos against elusive and like bouncing guys back to your hand, but Drummer Not dies pretty quick. You can maybe kill 3 guys if you're lucky. But usually what you do is you take out 2 little ones and then a big one. That's kind of what I've seen myself do.
Unless you put +5 power on Juggernaut.
Yeah, when you have the Blood of the Titans on it, it makes it a big difference. But either way, like, I don't think Drummer Not changes my gameplay strategy too much when I'm thinking about playing cards. I think Pip really doesn't either. He's that one that stuns if your enemy reaps. Grok doesn't. I'm trying to think, is there any Brobnar cards that really change the way you think? War Tamer.
Relentless Assault sometimes changes my...
having relentless results in your hand. So not a creature, but having
action.
An action, yeah.
If they have the buggy, the artifact
Drum
buggy,
buggy.
and then have so many strong creatures on the play.
Yeah, that does change your play. Which, by the way, Adam had a deck that has 2 of them. And it was ridiculous to play against because all the keys were like so expensive on my side. And I could barely make his keys possible.
And I kept whipping his creatures so
Yeah.
that I could keep
It was bad.
my keys.
That was a good deck. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for me. Like, I'm sure there are other must answer creatures we're not thinking about right now. But overall, I believe, the main point of this video, just to sum it all up and bring it all back in, is I think must answer creatures should be an element that you are considering when you're playing cards.
You're in.
I don't think it's a matter of like just play your hand every time. I think it's a matter of like think about the ceiling, think about the floor, think about if you're behind, think about the board state, and out of all those things, decide if playing that creature is going to give you a net advantage or not. And it's hard, and it's something that I think more times than not you're gonna want to play like you normally would. But there are times that I honestly do believe that making a play to set yourself up for a stronger next turn is actually better. Duskwitch is like the key one for that, in my opinion. Also, like Andrew was saying, like anything that lets you archive a bunch of stuff, those can be really good for that too.
Especially with your 2 key abductions deck.
Yeah, I did pull off 2 key. Yeah, to get off topic a little bit. On the same turn, I was able to do 2 key abductions and beat him yesterday, which is awesome.
3-0'd me.
3-0 because I had 1 key.
Had a terrible
and
deck.
bought back a ton of archive, and key abduction, brought back all my Mars guys, forged, played another one, forged again for like 3 amber and then 4 amber. Or 4 amber, yeah, 3 amber and then 4 amber.
You want me to
That was
tell them
crazy.
about the 2 decks I got in a row?
Oh yeah, the 2/7 Plague Rat deck.
I got 2 7 rat decks. I
Back to back open.
I also
Yeah.
got 2 Disambassador decks back to back also.
That's
which is pretty
awesome.
Cool.
That's really awesome. Yeah, we've been doing a box challenge, so we're gonna be uploading videos of those. But we opened a box of Age of Ascension, and each of us would open a deck and we'd play. The loser gets to open another deck. The winner moves on, and we played all the rounds to get the last standing deck. And we had 2 decks that actually won quite a few battles, but I was in the championship. I ended up getting defeated with a deck that was 3-0 before that.
Yeah.
So
One of my decks went 4-0.
we have the championship. We have the championship deck picked. I don't want to tell too much because if you guys end up watching it, but
Yeah.
anyway, we had some good rounds. We had some
Epic
3-0s. We had some double key abductions happen in there somewhere. Pretty fun stuff.
One round is just crazy.
Anyway, is there anything else you guys want to talk about prioritizing must answer creatures in your game plan?
I think we pretty much laid out all the
Cool.
basic stuff for it.
And I think next week what we're going to do is we're going to talk about playing against must answer creatures. How much does it change your gameplay strategy? How much does it affect like what you're going to be doing going forward? And it's really crazy because in my opinion, like I felt like there were must answer creatures in Call of the Archons, but with Age of Ascension there are absolutely must answer creatures now. I think the worst one was like that imp that makes you only play 2 cards a turn, which I still value that one pretty highly. Like that card needs to go if you can make it go.
Yeah.
And then there's
Or that imp guy that makes you lose an amber every.
the one that makes you lose an amber, like little pesty things. And I think that's gonna be it. We'll wrap it up here, and we'll see you guys next time. Keep gaming,
gaming.
guys.
Keep gaming,
Bye.
guys. Bye.